Texas, so I am an escapee or a refugee. But my kids were raised in a place that is more like this than what you think of California. It's a mountain town just below Lake Tahoe. It's called Grass Valley, and it's a mining and logging town. So when I come here, this is where I feel at home. This is my normal crew, so to speak. And when I moved to Texas, funny things started to happen to me. I've been dressing like this for as long as I can remember. I'm a horse guy. And it's probably, the Lord is my first love, my family's my second love, and then third is horses. And any kind of horses, I've been training horses for a lot of years. I've never bought a horse. It's a weird thing. I'm a weird horse guy. I've never paid for a horse. And the reason I've never paid for a horse is I was this stupid guy in the neighborhood or in town. Or if you had a really bad horse, people would drop off at my place. So it's like, Mark will take any horse. And so I've trained everything from minis to quarter horses to gaited horses like walkers and passos. My kids grew up riding passos. And my favorites are draft horses. And we had a lot of Belgians. My favorite Belgian, I'll show up a picture later. Some people show up grandkids. I'll show up my favorite Belgian. He was 18.3, 2,300 pounds. It was like riding an elephant. And when we got him, he was 5 years old. And are there any horse people in the audience? Okay, so at least one. Okay, so if you don't separate a young horse from his mother, then he stays a weanling, and he never changes. And weanlings are terrible animals. They're just very pushy and nosy, and they don't have any personal space. So when we got this horse, he was 2,300 pounds. He was still with his mom at 5 years old. He'd never been unpenned from his mom. So it was kind of a bad horse. We ended up training him to ride. I put him at a rescue ranch, and we put 5 kids at once on his back. Wonderful horse. The only reason I'm telling that story is this is where I come from. Like, so all the fancy city stuff and all the DC stuff and all this, even the state capital stuff, it's really outside of my normal realm of existence. Like, I prefer to live in the country. We lived 25 years in Grass Valley before we moved to Texas. I like small towns. I come through here and I feel at home. This, by the way, is a bustling metropolis compared to Grass Valley. Like, we had Main Street and Broad Street, and that was it. And probably 20 stores on each. So like this, I come here and I drive through town. I walked around a bunch this afternoon after we left. I went for a light. This is where I feel at home. Rooms like this are where I feel most at home. I'm not a veteran. I didn't serve. It's probably one of my only regrets in my life. My son did 4 years in the Marine Corps. My father-in-law was a Purple Heart recipient in World War II, fought on the front lines in Germany, was an infantryman. So our family has a connection, but growing up, it was just my side of the family, not something we ever did, so I didn't ever do it. And when I come to a place like this, it reminds me of everything that's great about the United States of America, about the people who've been willing to put their lives on the line forever. And when I say forever, I mean forever, like before the country was a country. I'm a student of history. I grew up in Los Angeles, California, so I didn't actually learn any history because I went to public school there. So most of my historical learning came really starting when I got engaged in politics about 15 years ago. I love history, but I also find history really frustrating because the way we read history in America and all over the world is what I call the great man and great woman theory of history. In other words, we read about, for the American Revolution, say George Washington, John Adams, Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, the Great Order of the American Revolution. But that's not really the majority of history. The majority of history is made by the same kind of people that are in this room. Right? They're not the guy on the white horse. They're not the eloquent leader, the person who served in the legislature or became president, because most people don't do those things. And most people, even people who are heroic, they actually commit their heroics in quiet private, right? Ronald Reagan said at one point during his term as president that they say we live in an era when there are no heroes, but we just don't know where to look. And he went on to say, it was a fairly long quote, but he went on to say, you'll find them on both sides of the counter at the grocery store, and you'll find them everywhere you go. You'll find them at the gas station. And we just don't realize that because heroes show themselves when times call for heroism. This is why we know the heroes in battle and all that stuff. Or there's a fire and somebody rushes into the fire, but heroes are all around us. This country breeds heroes. It's really an extraordinary place. I hear the phrase ordinary Americans all the time, and I always laugh at that phrase because I've had a chance to travel to 49 states. North Dakota is the only place I've still missed. And I don't meet any ordinary people. When I sit down with anybody in this country, and I've sat down with thousands at this point, and I always love to hear people's story. Like, why do you do what you do? I was talking to Marlene earlier, like, why do you do? Marlene is one of the best examples. She just said, well, like, what else would you do except for fighting, right? And I hear that from Americans all across the country. I've never heard a normal story. People always go like, oh, I'm an average person. There's nothing interesting about my life. And then you dig in, and they're amazing. And they're amazing because they're Americans. It's not necessarily true all over the world. We have a different national DNA. And when I say DNA, I don't necessarily mean genetically, physically, but I mean genetically, politically. We're a unique country in all of human history in that we are a self-governing country. And we kind of take that for granted. If you're a patriot, you know the term self-governance. The left doesn't use that term at all, but among people on the right, self-governance is a pretty common term. And I think we take it for granted in America that we're self-governing, like that's just normal. We have this kind of attitude like, wait, you can't tell me what to do. I'm an American, I'm a free American. You can't tell me what to do with my property or what kind of car I have to drive or all that stuff that they try to tell us how to do now. We're unique in that. When I first started learning American history, I was really curious where that came from. If you want to go back in all of human history and you want to find a self-governing nation, remember, if you look at all of human history, almost all nations were monarchies, and most often ruled by tyrants. That's the kind of swing of human history. We talk about the pendulum of human history, and it swings back and forth from tyranny to really bad tyranny. There isn't much liberty on that pendulum in human history. And so we're here in this unbelievable experiment. Next year's 250 years from the Declaration of Independence. This is completely unique in human history. If you want to find anything close to this, you have to go all the way back to the Judges period in the Old Testament. That's incredible. Remember, they were told to choose judges from among themselves, which is fascinating to me. So this is the Lord's form of government. It's self-government. That's what and I remember the first time I read that thinking, well, that's so weird because God knew who the best judges would be. He could have just told them, here's your 10 judges or however many judges he wanted to pick. But he believed that for human beings, because he gave us free will, that the best form of government was self-government. So you've got a span of human history from the Judges period of the Old Testament to the United States of America where there really isn't self-governance in the world, and then America pops onto the scene. And there's a story from American history that's literally my single favorite story from American history, and it's the story of a captain by the name of Levi Preston. And Levi Preston was there on that April 17th when the shot was fired that was heard around the world. And he was a farmer, and he was married, he had young kids, and for some reason I got picked up a musket and went out to fight the Redcoats. Important, I think we don't put this in good enough context. The Redcoats were the best formed fighting force in the history of the world. And literally the best fed, best trained, the most disciplined, the most well paid, the most motivated in the history of the world. And the people who went out to fight them were like us. This is crazy, right? It's like I said to you guys, hey, by the way, battalion of Marines showing up in the center of town at noon tomorrow, bring your firearms, we're gonna fight. Like, that's just crazy. And so why would they do something? And I was really curious about that, and I think the story of Levi Preston, it exemplifies this better than any story I've ever heard. It's not in any history. You can find this story online. If you look this story up, after I tell it to you, you'll find more details about it. So the reason we know this story is there was a historian by the name of Mellon Chamberlain. And in 1843, so long after the Revolution, he was going around the country. He was a young teacher. He was a self-taught historian, and he wanted to document the stories of the last remaining Minutemen. Now, if you think about that, 1843, these guys were old, like old by their standards especially. Right? So these guys would have been in their late 80s, early 90s. Now, we know guys that old now that are still working the ranch, but back then, if you were 85, 90 years old, that was a Methuselah old. Like everybody in town would know. If you rode into town and said, hey, you got anybody in town who's really up, they'd be like, Captain Preston out on the south side of town. He's the guy. And he wanted to collect the stories because he knew those stories were disappearing. There's no video, there's no audio recording. Like if you don't go talk to those guys and write it down, those stories are going to disappear. So we're blessed that Mellon Chamberlain was writing on doing this. And he goes into this town. At this point, Preston is retired in North Carolina, and that's where he runs across Meckler Preston, and he asks him a series of questions about the cause for the American Revolution. And he asks him questions based on what he thinks, what Mellon Chamberlain thinks the causes were. These will sound very familiar to you. He says, Captain Preston, when you went out to fight on Redcoats that day, what did you mean by it? And Preston first says, mean by it? Like he's just even confused by the question. He says, you know, you had young kids, you're a farmer, you go out and fight the Redcoats. What did you mean by doing it? Was it the Stamp Act? Were you frustrated by having to buy those stamps? Like, we've all heard that. I learned that in school. That was unjust. They put stamps on all their documents. It was just another means of taxation. And Preston says, stamps? Well, Governor Bernard locked them all in the armory. I'm sure I never bought one of them. So, not the Stamp Act. This is the guy who picked up the musket, right? He goes, well, maybe it was the high tax on British tea, and you were just frustrated by that. Taxation without representation. He said, son, I was a farmer. We didn't drink any tea, we drank coffee. The boys dumped it in the harbor, and that was pretty funny, but that was that. Right, so, no tea. Now, this is what I learned. It's the Boston Tea Party. It's the high tax on tea, right? That's what I learned in school. And then he asked the question, well, maybe you were reading the great revolutionary writers, the writers that all the founders were reading, and maybe you read Thomas Paine, Common Sense, maybe you were reading Burke or Montesquieu, and he said, I've never even heard of any of those men. I mean, we read Psalms, we read the Almanac, we read the Bible, but those men you speak of, I don't know those names. And so then he goes big, which my imagination tells me he was probably frustrated at this point. Like, everything I thought was the cause of the American Revolution, I've just asked a guy who fought, and he's telling me, no, none of that was the cause. It didn't cause him to go out on the field of battle. He goes, so I'll go big. And he throws the long bomb, the Hail Mary pass, and he says, maybe it was just British tyranny. You were just sick and tired of British tyranny. He goes, tyranny? No, I never felt any tyranny. So here's a guy, he's not fighting back against British tyranny. He's not reading the great revolutionary writers and being inspired. He doesn't drink tea, he doesn't care about the tea tax, he never bought a stamp, he's not frustrated with the Stamp Act. So I asked him, well then, why did you fight? And he said, why did we fight? He said, well, we had always governed ourselves. And we always intended to. And then Redcoats intended that we should. That's it. It's not complicated. And that's in your political DNA. And I don't care whether you became a citizen a week ago or your family's been here since the Mayflower. That, if you're an American, if you're an assimilated, believing American, that's part of your political DNA. And sometimes I think we don't realize how unusual that is. If you travel the world, I've had a chance to travel to a lot of different countries, we're weird. Americans are weird compared to the rest of the world. We are set apart by one thing that I think is really extraordinary. I call us, we're DIYers. Like, we believe in just fixing things. When we see something broken, you know, I traveled to Japan pretty extensively when I was younger. And I noticed that I got in trouble quite a bit in Japan because I would just do stuff, like without asking. Like, you'd go into a restaurant and I would have 8 people in a party, and so I saw 2 tables that sat 4 people, and I'd walk over and I'd drag the tables together and we'd push the chair. And we'd sit down and the host would be like, oh my God, you can't do that. We have to talk to the boss, like you're not allowed to move tables. And Americans were like, what? Like, what does that even mean? You know, or if you have a building in your community that's run down, like, none of us go, oh, well, somebody, the boss has to fix that. We're like, well, let's get together and raise the money and fix that stuff. We were in another city last night, Evanston, and it's unbelievable what they've done. I don't know if you guys have seen the roundhouse there, the old railroad roundhouse. It's one of the most beautiful restored buildings I've ever seen in my life, and the community did that. Like, it wasn't some like boss man who stepped up and said, I'm going to fix this and I'm going to make sure everybody. It's like the community said, this is a resource and we need to preserve it. So that's unusual as Americans. And I think this is a really important opening because I think this ties into everything we're doing, because I think what we're doing with Article 5 is a self-help. It's a DIY. Because I don't expect Washington, D.C. ever, and I'm going to say this repeatedly, ever, never, ever, no matter who we send there, ever, never, ever, to fix itself. If you believe it will, then you're delusional. Every single administration in the history of the United States of America, with the exception of Calvin Coolidge, who I think is one of the greatest and most unsung heroes in American history, certainly one of the best presidents, every single other administration has grown the size, scope, and expense of the American government. Everyone. And so if we think, oh, the federal government's too big and we need to shrink it, so you know what we'll do? I know what we'll do. We will elect better people, and we'll send them to Washington, D.C., and they will shrink the government, and they will change everything. How's that worked out for us? I'll tell you how it worked out for me personally. This is an important part of my story. I accidentally ended up being one of the people who lead the Tea Party movement. When I say accidentally, God had his hand on my shoulder. I had no idea. I had never done anything politically in my life. I was very politically oriented. I paid attention. I would say I knew a lot. I read the news all the time. I've always been a conservative. So all that stuff was in there, but I never did anything. I voted mostly. To be honest with you, I didn't even vote in every election. Like, I was busy with my kids, coaching soccer sometimes. I would miss one. You know, I was raising my kids. I was doing productive things that conservative people do. And I paid attention, but I did not get engaged. And then the Tea Party movement started to happen. And this happened, actually, it began February 20th of 2009. And most people don't know that. If you know anything about the Tea Party movement, most people think it started April 15th of 2009, the big giant Tea Party thing all over the country. I was involved in that. But it started several months earlier, and there's a guy by the name of Rick Santelli. Anybody know the name Rick Santelli? Okay, so one person, I think this is horrifying. This guy's an American hero. Like, he literally started that movement in 1990. So he's a reporter for CNBC, and he reports from the floor of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, right? So first of all, it's not the stock exchange, it's a different thing. Like, this is where pork bellies are traded, oil futures and coal futures. So this guy who understands how America works, right? And we're about to do the TARP bailout, the mortgage bailout, and he's horrified. And he says to the anchors back in New York City, this is horrifying. We're going to take people who didn't do anything wrong, regular law-abiding taxpayers who did not get upside down on their mortgages, and then we're going to make them pay taxes to pay for the people who got upside down on their mortgages, who maybe took out a second to buy a boat or a vacation home or something. And he said, I'm not blaming them, but those people got upside down, these people didn't, and we're going to make these people pay for those people, and that's outrageous, and it's un-American. And the anchors started mocking him, literally. They were making fun of the traders who were cheering for him on the floor. And they said, oh, you got the traders eating out of your hand. And he got pissed. He was angry. And he said, you know, you don't understand. These people understand how America works. You don't understand how America works. If we're going to spend, you know, $100 billion, well, why don't we just spend $1 trillion and then everybody will be rich? We tried that during COVID. That didn't work either, right? He didn't know that was coming down the pike. And he said we should hold a Tea Party on the shores of Lake Michigan on July 4th. And so this was February 20th, so months later he's saying, and I'm going to invite all productive Americans to be on the shore of Lake Michigan with me. He was not trying to start a movement. Rick's known for this ranting. I've talked to him one time about it. He's like, I was just talking. Like, and it's not that he wasn't genuine, but he wasn't trying to start anything. And what happened is that got picked up on the web, and ultimately Limbaugh picked up on it, Rush Limbaugh, and played that clip on his radio show. Millions of people heard about it, and it was going viral. This is early days of virality. It was going viral on the web, and that's when I heard it. I heard that, what this guy said, I totally believe. And a small group of people got together on Twitter. 12 people got on a conference call, and they decided, you know, we should do something about this. It's viral, it's exploding all over the country. If we wait till July, who knows what July will bring. Let's do it right now. And so they decided to hold tea parties 1 week later, February 27th of 2009. And I was not on that original call, but I heard about this call to hold tea parties, and so I went to my wife. I've been married a long time, so I know how this works. I said, honey, I need your permission. I think we should do this thing. She's from Boston originally, so she had a tea party. Yeah, I like that. And so we held a protest in Sacramento, California on February 27th. There were 150 people that showed up at that protest. And I was so blown away, first of all, that there were 149 sane people in California. Like, that was kind of a miracle to me, and although better in my small town. And I had a great time. It was really fun, and I asked pretty much everybody who was there. By the way, I figured out it was about 25% Democrats were there, and I asked them, well, why are you here? Like, what? Like, this is a weird thing. We're all out here protesting, holding signs saying, don't mortgage our future. Why are you here? And they all said some version of, I don't know what else to do. Like, I vote for people that I think represent me, and then they go to DC, and they do stuff that I don't even recognize, and so like I just don't know what else to do. I came back home, and it was really fun. My parents were with me, my kids were there, they were 10 and 13, and we were pretty jacked up on the way home, and And my son said something, he was 13 at the time, he's been through the Marine Corps now, and he's a lawyer in the conservative fight, and he's back there, and my son never stops talking. I have no idea where he got that from, by the way. So he's in the back seat, he's dead quiet. And usually if Jacob's quiet, he's sleeping or he doesn't feel well. And so I kind of turned around like, Jacob, are you okay? And he said, they're going to write about what we just did in the history books, which was so prescient. Like I was just thinking, wow, that was cool. We had a great time. But he had this sense of place in that moment to know something is happening in his little 13-year-old brain. So we go home, and my thing is I love networking because I just love people. And so I started calling around everybody I could find in California that had done one of these events. Turns out there were 35 of them across the country. About 39,000 people came out on that day. And so I started calling around California, everybody I could find on Facebook that was to one of these events. And I'm just like, want to know, like, how was it? Was yours fun? Like, I found out in California that we needed a permit. I almost got arrested in the state capitol. Thank God my mom's retired law enforcement, and she worked it out for us, but who knew, right? And some people were like, oh, we had 1,000 people, and nobody could hear what we were saying because we didn't have a sound system. This is how naive we were and how grassroots it was. And so I'm calling all these people. One day I get a call from somebody in the media, and like I think it was a Sacramento television or radio station, something like that. I'm like, oh, this is Spark Becker. Yes, it is. How we're calling because we heard you're the Tea Party organizer for California. What? Like, what do you do? No, absolutely no, I'm not. Like, well, everybody we call, when we ask who's the Tea Party organizer, they give us your name. And I'm thinking, I didn't know these words, and I'm thinking, this is totally fake news. Like, this is just absolutely not true. Like, I'm not organizing anything. I was just calling around to chat with people and find out what they did. But it ends up sort of thrusting me into the public sphere in a way that I didn't expect. And so I pushed back against that, but they don't care. They write a story, and I'm now a Tea Party organizer. So I keep calling around the country. I broaden my circle. I meet people all over the country who did these things. And there were 5 or 6 of us that came together and said, man, that was amazing. We did that in a week. Like, imagine what we could do if we had 6 weeks. Like, instead of 35, I bet we could have 70 of these things. And so we decided to hold the Tax Day Tea Party. And we put up a little web page on it. This shows you how naive I was. I put my home phone number on there. By the way, I'm a privacy attorney by training, so that's how stupid I was. And so we start doing this thing, and in the first week, you get 70 people. Fill out our little form that says, I want to list my Tea Party on your page. And so now we pretty much hit our goal in the first week, and then it just keeps growing and growing and growing over the next few weeks to the point where eventually we cut it off on the 13th of April, and it was 850 Tea Parties around the country. 1.2 million people came out. Fox News covered it in Sacramento, where I did the event. We had over 20,000 people come out. It's the biggest protest in Capitol history in Sacramento. I literally had no idea what I was doing. Thank God a local taxpayer group saved me. Like, do you have a stage? I'm like, no, do I need one? I mean, that's how, like, do you have a sound system? Do you have a permit? Like, I didn't know any of this stuff. Do you have insurance? So a local taxpayer group took care of one. In Atlanta, I think we had closer to 30,000 people. Sean Hannity showed up in Atlanta. We had Greta Van Susteren, when she was still in office, showed up in Washington, D.C. at our event. Somehow this seems appropriate. Glenn Beck was still in office, he was at the Alamo. Somehow that seems appropriate for back. So we finished that up, and it completely flipped my life upside down. I would work from home as a privacy attorney. I spent all my time raising my kids, so we're 10 and 13, teaching them to ride horses. I coached soccer. I played football growing up. I don't know anything about soccer, but I just like being with my kids, so I was doing all that stuff. And suddenly I was a public figure. And if you talk to any of my friends, they would have told you, fame and fortune. Mark would take fortune, but definitely not fame. So then I was in the limelight. All kinds of crazy stuff happened. This is not unique to me, but I'm very empathetic with anybody who's in the public eye. People were in our house, people tapped our phones, people stole our garbage, death threats. I still get all that, the death threat stuff all the time. You know, people smearing us in the media. Marlene might know something about that locally. But I still get it nationally. All people say I'm funded by George Soros, like the craziest stuff. We get all this stuff all the time. So that starts happening in my life. And I basically have to shut down my law practice because half of my clients were liberals who just didn't like the fact that I was doing politics. And the other half, honestly, I just didn't have time. And I felt like, okay, I've been put in this place where I have a chance to do something for my country. And so, like Marlene says, well, what are you going to do? Like, you're going to do something, right? If everybody in this room is here because they feel like they want to do something for their country. So that's where I was at. Fast forward a few years, we led the largest swing class in the history of Congress, and that was in 2010. It's actually 62 seats, flip hands, from Democrat to Republican. And I think everything in DC is about to change. Like, that's the biggest wave election since 1938. That sends a pretty serious message to DC. Now, I want to clarify one thing. I didn't do that. I didn't found the Tea Party. People will say to me when I go on TV, oh, Mark Meckler, I'm one of the founders of the Tea Party. That's as funny as if you're at the beach and you saw a surfer come in off the ocean and you said, that's a beautiful wave you created. I mean, the surfer could say, well, thanks, I learned how to surf and so I could ride that beautiful wave, but I would say God created that wave and the surfer took advantage of it. That's the best I could say about what I did in the Tea Party movement. Like, I'm blessed to have ridden that wave and helped to give it a place to express itself. But I didn't create it, and I think it was led by literally thousands of people across the country who led the Tea Party. So we have this wave election, I think everything's going to change, and then nothing changes. I see you shaking your head, you remember. It's literally one of the most horrifying things that ever happened in my life. And I went to DC, I was there on the night when the elections were won, and so did Eddie. We had this event on Capitol Hill, and there was media from all over the world, and we felt like, man, we changed the world. And then I watched them get picked off one by one. Good people who we sent to Washington, D.C., who claimed Tea Party values, constitutional fidelity, free markets, right? They believed, they said they believed in that stuff. We did everything, they were from among us, we did everything we could to get them. And they went to D.C., some of them got picked off literally the first week. Literally, they stopped returning our calls. Some of them, it took a couple of months. Almost all of them got taken by the storm. The ones that were really good, retired. They quit. Because they realized that you can't change DC from inside DC. And they were productive Americans. They just wanted to go back to their regular lives because they realized they couldn't change DC from inside. It was too big, it was too ugly. The Leviathan had just grown too out of control. And so when I came out of that, aside from just being blown away at how terrible it was, I had this thing that kept happening to me as I'd speak at a meeting like this, or a bigger meeting, and then people would ask me, okay, so what do we do? My answer was, I don't know. Like, I did what I thought you should do. This is what I've always been taught. Like, if you go out and you work hard for candidates, and you help them raise money, and you knock on doors for them, and you get them elected, then they do the things that they told you they were going to do. And I don't like, if that doesn't work, then I don't know what to do. And that's actually fine if you're sitting around on a fishing boat and you're, fishing for large amount of bass with your friends and you're drinking a beer and you say, I don't know what the heck to do, that's okay. But if you're standing up here or you're doing television interviews or whatever and people are asking you and they're looking to you for leadership and you're like, oh, I don't know, that's not okay. It's not. It's a failure of leadership and a failure of responsibility, and that's how I felt. And so I was going to leave politics. That was my intent. And I just thought I did what I came to do. It didn't work. This is, by the way, I can totally relate to Elon Musk. Musk goes out, spends $250 million of his own money, helps the president get elected, helps retain majorities, and gets appointed head of Doge, has all these incredible things going on, and then basically none of it happens. And he's throwing a temper tantrum right now, this idea of third party, and I can completely empathize with the temper tantrum. Because it's like, losing is bad. It's always bad. I hate to lose. But winning, and then your result is a loss, that's way worse. And so that's where he's at, that's where I was at. I was going to leave. I was talking to a really good friend of mine who's on my board of directors, just an incredible mentor of mine, a guy named Tim Dunn, an incredible Christian man out of Texas, one of the people who led me to the Lord and who I owe a debt of gratitude I can never repay. And I told him I was leaving politics. And he said, oh, you can't leave politics. I'm like, no, I definitely can. I know exactly how I got here and I know exactly how to get out. And he said, look, you hate politics. You hate politicians. You're not getting rich off it, obviously. You went broke, so you're not trying to get rich off it. You don't want to be famous. You're exactly the kind of person we need in politics. I'm like, yeah, Tim, I'm not going to do it. And he's like, I'll make you a proposition. Let's you and I figure out how to save the country together. And I said, I don't know how. And he said, I don't either. But I'm willing to help you start an organization and try and figure it out together. And I'll pay you what your family needs to survive. You just tell me what that is, and we'll figure it out together. And I just thought, that's the stupidest job offer I've ever gotten in my life. Like somebody like, I will help you try to save the country and I'll pay you for it. So of course I said yes. We founded something called Citizens for Self-Governance. The first thing I did was raise $1 million and give it away to Tea Party groups that got nothing from the Tea Party movement. This is one of the reasons I left Tea Party Patriots. Last year I was there, we raised $14 million. That's a lot of money, at least to me. And we gave none of it to local groups. And I had this huge fight on the board. I thought we should give at least 50% of our net revenue to local groups. And my board's complaint was, well, then everybody will ask us for money. We got a lot of money. Let's give it away to these local groups and help them do things. And so I ended up leaving. So I raised $1 million and I gave it out to a bunch of local groups. That was my number one, kind of pay what I felt like was my penance, what our group should have done in the first place. Second thing I did, and I don't recommend this, by the way, is I sued the IRS. And it's not pleasant. It's not a pleasant experience to have the IRS come after you. And of course, they came after me because I helped sue them. I didn't personally sue. My local Tea Party group sued. The woman who ran it, Kate Rapini, just quintessential grandma running a local Tea Party. They targeted her. So she stepped up to be the named plaintiff, and I helped fund the class action lawsuit. And they settled, which is unbelievable, 4.5 years later for $3.7 million. But by then, they had disassembled most of the Tea Party movement. This was Barack Obama's goal, and it mostly worked. And most of the Tea Party groups were gone by then. We distributed as much of the money as we could to the groups that remained. And I was still trying to figure out what to do, and I ran into a guy by the name of Mike Ferris. And does anybody know that name? Anybody know who Mike Ferris is? You know, so if you're part of the homeschool movement, most people would know the name Mike Ferris. Mike was the founder of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. If you homeschool your kids or your grandkids are homeschooled, we owe that to Mike Ferris, because in the 1970s that was illegal in one way or another in all 50 states. And Mike just thought that was fundamentally unreasonable, that we should be able to educate our own kids. He thought that was a fundamental right. And so he fought for that. And I wanted to think about it in the late 1970s, early 1980s, no internet, no cell phones. How do you organize a national movement? He did it. Took him 25 years to make it legal in all states. California, of course, was the last state where he had to fight his way to that. And Mike called me up and he asked me a question, are you happy with what you've accomplished? Well, his answer was no. No, I'm miserable. I spent all my money. I went rogue. We helped elect the largest class and then they did nothing. And so, no, of course I'm not happy. And he said, well, that's because you're approaching the problem incorrectly. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, do you think we have a personnel problem in Washington, D.C.? I said, there are people say this today. And I said, well, yeah, of course. And he said, well, what we really have is a structure problem. We've broken the structure of Washington, D.C., this beautiful balance of checks and balances that our framers set forth. And if we don't fix that, it does not matter how many good people you send to D.C. The system will eat them alive. It is a broken system. If you've ever run your own business, you know exactly what I'm saying intuitively. If you have a bad system in your business, you hire good people and you make them work in a bad system, you'll get a bad result. That immediately resonated with me. I'm a business person before I'm a political guy or a nonprofit guy, and so it made perfect sense to me. And he started to explain to me the mechanism of Article 5 and how the states were intended and could gather to propose amendments to restrain federal tyranny. It made sense to me. We spent about an hour on the phone. I had a couple of questions that I think lots of people have, and he answered them easily and to my satisfaction. Weirdly, like a year before that, and I say weirdly, I think God had put me there, I co-hosted a meeting at Harvard Law School. Now look at me and imagine me at Harvard Law School, because it's kind of funny. And there was a professor there that's a liberal guy. We call him one of the last honest liberals, a guy by the name of Larry Lessig. And he had invited me to go co-host something on Article 5. And I thought it was super interesting because there were people on the left who were in favor and people on the left who were opposed. There were people on the right who were in favor and people on the right who were opposed. And I thought, wow, we're actually going to have a real discussion. Like, it's not just ideology, right? This is like people have genuine thoughts about this. And that's why I agree to do it. You can go see videotape of me there. My position back then was like, I don't know. I don't know if this is something, I wasn't afraid of it, but I'm like, I don't even know if it's worth trying. Like, I don't know if you could do this thing. And so that was my first exposure. So by the time Mike brings it to me, I'm already relatively expert on it. I spent a bunch of time studying it. He convinces me that it's a good thing to do. he has his homeschool network, I have my Tea Party network. He said, I think we can do this. And he laid out a plan, which we're still working today. He said, it's gonna be hard, it's gonna take a long time, it's gonna be a slog. Sometimes you're gonna wanna quit, but it took him, he said, it took me 25 years to get homeschooling done. We can get this done. It'll be the first time in American history that we've done this. So I started pursuing this because of what Mike said. My little board, my little organization agreed that we wanted to pursue this, and that's how the Convention of States project was born. About a year ago, my first grandchild, anybody in here have grandkids? Yeah, there's a bunch. You guys look like you might have enough gray hair like me to have grandkids, some of you. You know, when my kids were born, I have two kids, a son who's 29, my daughter who's 26. And when my kids were born, I remember holding them for the first time. Every parent, like, that's singed in your memory. And I remember holding my kids and thinking, man, I will never let anything happen to you. I will protect you. I would put my body in between you and anything. Like, I will be here forever for you. And that's what I thought when my two kids were born. When my granddaughter was born, I had a completely different experience. It started the same. They put Laurel in its Lorelei. She was a year old on July 29th. So they put Lorelei in my arms and holding her and looking at her, having that same sort of ferocious fatherly feeling, grandfatherly in this case, that I'm going to protect you and I will always be here for you. And then I remember thinking, no, I won't. She's 1 year old right now. I'm 63. If I'm really blessed, I'll see her to her 30th birthday. Like, that would be amazing. That's beyond statistical reasonableness. I think right now, average age of expiration for guys in America is 81 years old. So, 30 years from now, I would be 93. So I'd be really old. So I might see her to her 30th birthday. And it terrified me. Because I thought, I don't like the way the country is right now. I don't like what I'm going to leave to you. I don't want you to have to fight the same fights that I've been fighting for the last 15 years. And in a way, it's hard to imagine that I got more passionate about what I'm doing, but it rededicated me to the fight. Like, I gotta fix this. I gotta do something. I gotta do everything I can do. I don't know what's gonna happen to America. None of us know. God knows. He's the only one. I pray to him all the time about it. I beseech him to have mercy upon us, not that we deserve it. But that's my prayer. I believe that he will. I think his hand of favor has been on the United States for a very long time. And I pray that he continues to do that. Again, I don't think we necessarily deserve it. Over 70 million babies dead in America in our own hands because of abortion. But I pray for that. But I don't know what's going to happen. Here's what I absolutely know. When I'm gone, whatever happens, my grandkids, my great-grandkids are going to ask me a question. And they're going to ask, where was Grandpa when the country was at risk and the country was saved, or we don't know what it's like to be free? What was Grandpa doing when we were losing our freedom? And the answer that I want my kids to be able to give, or my grandkids, well, your great-grandpa, he was in the fight. And he was willing to do whatever it took. He was willing to travel away from his family. He was willing to deal with whatever threats. He was willing to put aside whatever financial benefit he could have earned by being a lawyer and doing all that stuff, being in business like he used to do, because he wanted a better country for you guys. That's the one thing I want to be sure of. I can only control what I do. I can't control what happens in the country. So that's what my fight's about. I'm in it for my kids and my grandkids, and frankly, all of posterity. Because we're here, because we can look back at a guy like Levi Preston, and we can thank God that Preston was willing to walk on the field of battle at Lexington and be shot at by the Redcoats. So he was willing to do that. What at least we can do is what we're doing, being engaged in the fight, however we're engaged in the fight. Not everybody's engaged in the fight the same way. I think I'm blessed to get to do this full-time all over the country and travel around. Not everybody gets to do what I do. Everybody fights in their own way, whether it's being on the city council or going to a school board meeting or coming to a meeting like this. I appreciate everybody and everything they do, but that's what I want. So I want to talk a little bit about why Article 5 and why I think this is the main remedy. Like, I don't know any other remedy that will work the way this remedy works. Now, I want to say something really carefully. It's not a silver bullet. There is no silver. And in fact, the most important thing is I can tell you is nothing works without God's grace and God's hand in it. We need providence. We need the salvation of providence. You know, the framers knew this. They prayed during the Revolutionary War there in Independence Hall. Franklin called for prayer among the men that were there when they were drafting the Constitution. So without that underlying thing, the spiritual reawakening, what I think is actually taking place in this country is a third awakening right now. I see it as I travel around the country. Without that, it's not Article 5, it's not elections, it doesn't matter. It's not Trump, it's not, like, without God's hand in it, it doesn't matter. But as far as a tool of governance, I don't know anything else that will work in the way that Article 5 will work. The way we got Article 5 is that in convention on September 15, 1787, Colonel George Mason stood up. He spoke the third most of anybody at convention, so I'm pretty sure by this point, this is 2 days before the end of convention, they're probably sick and tired of the colonel. You know how you go to meetings and you're in a classroom and there's the guy, or two guys or three, that they're the ones that are always like, I want to talk. And everybody's like, oh, all right, can we go home now? Remember, these guys are far away from home. They're locked in a room. It's hot. They're wearing like heavy wool coats and lace blouses and neckties, and they're probably sick and tired of everything. And he says, they're on final draft. And he says, and I'm going to paraphrase, it's important, I'm not good at exact quotes. Same with the Bible, so I paraphrase. Basically says, we have a problem with the document that's written. We've given the power to Congress to propose amendments should they deem them necessary, but we've not given the same power to the people acting through the states. And he asks a question, again paraphrasing, basically, are we so naive that we believe that a federal government that becomes a tyranny will propose amendments to restrain its own tyranny? Now, we don't have any video. I wish we had video. I'm pretty sure they laughed. Why do I say I'm pretty sure they laughed? Because we have Madison's notes. It doesn't say they laughed, but it says in Latin, nin com, and that's a Latin abbreviation for no comment or no debate, right? Most people don't. Madison wrote the notes in like 5 different languages and his own shorthand. Whatever was shortest is what he used. So there is no comment. And then Eldridge Gerry, the father, by the way, as an aside of gerrymandering. It's really pronounced Gary. It should be called gerrymandering. But Eldridge Gerry proposes the language of the second clause of Article 5, and it's unanimously adopted as part of the Constitution. It's the only one that I'm aware of. Maybe there's something else. The only one I'm aware of where there's no debate and it's unanimously put into the Constitution. Because they all knew. They came from tyranny. They had this experience of centralized government becoming a tyranny. When you think of the colonists rising up to throw off the British Empire, they must have really hated the British Empire, right? Like to go to war and throw them off? Nope. They didn't. If you read the pamphleteers of the time, I read a lot of the original pamphlets, it's fascinating. Those are the bloggers of that day or the podcasters of that day, because they might put out 50,000 pamphlets. That was an unbelievable number back in that day. 100,000, some of the biggest pamphlets went out among the colonies. You'll find this language in a lot of pamphlets. It says the British form of government is the finest form of government ever instituted among mankind for the preservation of liberty. That's written by people who were trying to throw off the British. That's fascinating to me. And if you read what comes after it, it's also fascinating because it usually says something like, except now we find all branches of the government conspiring against the common man. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Right? So they were just where we are. They didn't hate the government. They just felt the government was being usurped and used against them. So that's where we are. And the framers gave us a tool to use if we got into this circumstance. So here we are. Anybody think that the federal government isn't overbearing? Like it's the right size? Okay, because I would have to ask you to leave if that's what you want. I wouldn't do that. It's okay. No, of course, we all believe the federal government's too big. So the question is just like a debate about, well, so what do we do about that? And so I think you use Article 5. It says that when 2/3 of states call for a convention, they can convene in a convention and they can propose amendments. And then those amendments can be sent out to the states for ratification. It takes 3/4 of states or 38 states to ratify, 34 to call, 38 to ratify. What we're doing is we have 3 subject matter areas that our application proposes. All the states have the same application. We have a model application given to legislatures. First is anything that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government. Anybody think the federal government is financially out of control? Yeah, $37 trillion in debt. I think when we started this, it was like 28 trillion, 27 trillion, something like that. So 10 trillion additional debt, thanks to the people who oppose us. Also, by the way, the same people who oppose convention of states right now, in 1982, we got within 2 states of getting to a convention for a balanced budget amendment. Back then, anybody have a guess what the debt was in 1982?
10 billion.
You said 4. 4 trillion, not like a fantasy for us, for the debt to be $4 trillion. Same people who oppose us today, for the exact same reasons, defeated it when it got to 32 states. It was actually unbelievable. It was the same groups on the right, and it was the AFL-CIO on the left. And that I don't want to say they worked together because I was going to be accurate, but they were saying the same things and pushing the same talking points. And a couple of states rescinded, and they defeated the balanced budget amendment. So the first is fiscal restraint. Second is anything that would impose term limits. Anybody think we need term limits in Washington, D.C.? Yep, that's 85% this year. So in a room of 100 people, 85 people would normally say yes. Ours also says term limits on federal officials. So that means bureaucrats, the deep state, right? The people we know that wield a lot of power now. If you have term limits on elected officials only and you don't have them on the deep state will become more powerful. So that's why we put that in our application. The third is anything that would limit the scope, power, and jurisdiction of the federal government. And that to me is the most important one because I think the administrative state is entirely unconstitutional. And the only way you're going to do away with that is to do it by constitutions. To say, for example, and I'm actually working with the Department of Education on this right now, is to say, yes, Trump hopefully will do away with the Department of Education, and then we're going to put that in the Constitution. The federal government may not be involved in education. And so these are things that we can do, that we can also, here's another one. I'm horrified by the idea of packing up the Supreme Court. The left has said if they get the House and the Senate, they will pack the Supreme Court. So they will do that, and then we'll lose all of them. So they'll take away our Second Amendment rights, our First Amendment rights, they'll limit our freedom of religion, they'll limit our freedom of expression. They've already said they want to do all that stuff, and they've said they will do it if they get the House, the Senate, and the presidency. And so we should put a constitutional amendment in limiting the Supreme Court tonight, and that's another thing we can do. Here's another one we can do, birthright citizenship. This shouldn't be an argument. Seems to me it's clear that birthright citizenship was not intended for people who just drop babies in the United States, like for birth tourism. But we can put that in the Constitution. Another fight we just had recently, which I think is important, I'm from Texas, and there's this big question, can Texas secure its own border? Like, to me, that's unbelievable. I live not that far from the border, about 4 hours from the border. I would go down to McAllen where I have friends. They were literally overrun by illegal immigrants. You would go to McAllen, it's an 85% Hispanic town, great community, and there would be illegal immigrants on every street corner in the commercial areas, like just completely overrunning the town. And the federal government said, well, Texas has no right to enforce that. And I think I think we have a legal right to enforce it, but we couldn't do it. And so I think you put in the Constitution a full right to enforce the borders and to enforce immigration. So there's a bunch of things we can do to limit federal power. I think we got to get the federal government out of environment, out of education, out of healthcare, out of a lot of things that we all complain about. We can complain, we can send people to Washington, D.C., and we can beg the king to give us our power back. Or we can take our power. I think those are our choices right now. That's where I'm at. There's a couple of things that I want to address up front, and then I'm going to open it for questions, because to me that's always the best part. The number one objection that I hear from people who oppose convention of states, and some people I just want to be clear, do it entirely in good faith, and they're usually people who I agree with 95% of the time, so 90 to 95% of the time. You know, they're good. I'm talking about conservatives. I'm not talking about the lefties who oppose us, but they have concerns and fears. And the one that I hear most often is the idea of what they call a runaway convention. Now, first of all, it's important to know where the idea of a runaway convention comes from. That was actually invented by Chief Justice Warren Burger. And Chief Justice Warren Burger, in case you don't recall this, was the guy who gave us Roe versus Wade. Not a guy I would normally want to be taking advice from. He was a leftist activist justice. And the reason that gets out there is there's a now infamous letter from Phyllis Schlafly, the founder of Eagle Forum, great woman, great constitutionalist, the original fighter for the right to life in America, I would say. I mean, I think she can wear that crown, in my opinion. She became friends with Chief Justice Burger after he retired, and they were both on the Bicentennial Commission for the Constitution. So they know each other socially. There's a rising tide in America at that time for a life amendment. to overturn Roe versus Wade. 20 states, by the way, actually passed a call for a convention to overturn Roe versus Wade, including the life amendment. By the way, the conservative groups, this is amazing to me, the conservative groups who are so anti-abortion who oppose us, they stopped that. They actually, so I think the blood of a lot of these babies is on their hands because they stopped that right to life amendment. 20 states, that's a significant way. There were 19 states now. They were further than this. And so some of these groups on the right fighting against us stopped us from saving the babies in them. Phyllis Schlafly wrote a letter to Chief Justice Warren Burger and said, what do you think of this idea of the convention? What do you think he said? Any guesses? He said, oh, that's a great idea. Overturn the seminal decision of my entire judicial career by calling him. That's really what I want you to do. It's a great, of course not. He said it's a terrible idea, and he said we would be unable to control the convention, we would probably lose our beloved Constitution in a runaway convention. And then he went out and he got law professors at Harvard and Yale, bastions of conservatism, right, to write law review articles about a runaway convention. And that's how this ends up entering the American lexicon. And I would argue that's how it ends up infecting the American right. It's not true. It came from the left. Why did the left want to do that? Because the left has amended the Constitution repeatedly in the last 115 years because the Supreme Court did their bidding. People will say, well, Mark, you know, this is the Constitution. We all know what it says. It's very simple, and all we have to do is follow this Constitution. And I wish it were that simple. People will say to me, Mark, they don't follow the Constitution now. And the answer is no, they actually do follow the Constitution now, most of the time. I think there are notable exceptions, but the vast majority of the time they follow the Constitution. The question is which Constitution? This is the one we all know. Lots of you carry one of these in your pockets. I have it on my phone now, but I used to carry one of these around. But there's another Constitution. If you write to the government publishing office or go online to the GPO, the government publishing office, you can order a Constitution, and it actually just says Constitution of the United States of America. And what you get is something like that. So this says, just in case you can't read all that way, Constitution of the United States of America. It doesn't look anything like the Constitution. This one was published probably in, this is 2002, so that's 23 years ago. It's 2,600 pages, probably weighs 10 pounds. It contains every case ever issued by the United States Supreme Court to tell us what this means. Which in and of itself to me is an outrageous proposition, meaning either the framers were such idiots and so obtuse that they wrote a document this small and this concise that requires 2,600 pages, now over 3,000 pages to tell us what it means, or we're just so stupid that we can't understand it. And neither of those things are true. It's because the Supreme Court has done things they were never intended to do, and instead of interpreting the Constitution, which they were never even supposed to have the ultimate authority to interpret the Constitution, they gave that to themselves in Marbury versus Madison. Instead of just doing that, what they've done is write the law. By the way, I don't believe that any human has ever read that book. Like, you can't just sit down and read every case ever issued by the Supreme Court. I've never met anybody who claims to have read it. I'm a lawyer, I've never read it. I know lots of constitutional lawyers, they've never read it. But this is what we live under. So when people say we don't follow the Constitution, they are right about this one, but this is the one, post-Marbury versus Madison, that we live under. So the question is, if we don't think that's correct, that has a word fell in it, the gay marriage decision, until recently Roe versus Wade was in there before it was overturned by Dobbs. If we don't think that stuff is right, there's two ways to fix that. One way is we go out and we find the right plaintiff with the right fact pattern in the right district with the right lawyers who can make it up through the appeals system and ultimately posture it correctly in front of the United States Supreme Court, like what happened with Dobbs. And then, thank God, we can rely on Chief Justice John Roberts. Right? And this took probably 115 years to get like this. Because for about the first 100 years of the country, they referred to the framers, and they did pretty good on original stuff. Pretty good, I say. I mean, Marbury versus Madison wasn't good, and there's bad decisions in there, but the real abuse started about 115 years ago, the Wilson administration era. So there's two ways. You get the lawyer and the lawsuit and all that stuff, and you pray you get the right decision out of the Supreme Court. By the way, I'm proud to say Mike Ferris, my co-founder of Convention of States, was co-counsel on the Dobbs decision. He drafted the law that the Dobbs decision was based on. And so that's how we got that overturned. Mike's been in the Supreme Court 13 times, overseeing 13 cases, won 12 of them in the last 6 years. So he's pretty good with the Constitution. A lot better than me, that's for sure. The second way is call an Article 5 convention. There is no way. Like, those are the two ways. If we don't think this is right, and we want to fix it, and we want to fix large swaths of it, then there's the legal way, you know, hiring lawyers and all that, or there's an Article 5 convention. The legal way, we don't have another 100 years. And we don't have time to wait for every perfect case, every perfect district, to go all the way to the Supreme Court, and then we pray we have the right balance of justices on the court and the right Supreme Court, the right Chief Justice who assigns it to the right justice, we just don't have that time. And so that's why we use Article 5. So runaway comes from the left. Here's what I can't have. I'm just going to start with the easiest one. I'm not very good at math, I'm aware, we're just not good at math. I say math is a conspiracy by engineers to make lawyers feel stupid. And it does make me feel stupid, I'm not that bad. But I can do this math. It takes 38 states to ratify any amendment. Right? That's a high bar, it's 3/4 of the states. It takes only 13 states to stop it. That's the inverse math, right? So if you get 13 states that say no, then nothing that came out of convention can be ratified with 13 states saying no. If you understand the legislative process, the way it works for a state to say no to any amendment that's proposed, now let's assume that what our opponents say can happen, the convention runs away, it's completely out of control, they propose things you and I wouldn't like as conservatives, and then it goes out for ratification. The way a state says no to ratifying is they do nothing. They don't hold a hearing, they don't have a vote, there's no testimony, they just never take it up. And by the way, when we say 13 states, what I mean is the 13 most conservative states, because that's who would say no to something you and I wouldn't like. And this is a relatively conservative state. It's not among the 13 most conservative. Texas, right by heart, is not among the 13 most conservative. 13 most conservative states, and then it takes only one house, by the way, in each of the 13 most conservative states to say no. And really, I mean, and you would know this, Marlene, because you're actually in the legislature, it takes only one committee. Because that's going to go through a particular committee in every legislature. So it takes one committee to say, well, and then really, and you know how this works, it just takes one chairman who just says, no, we're not going to hear it. We're definitely not going to do that. So there's just, it's ridiculous, this idea of a runaway convention. It was invented by the left. In all of American history, we've had 41 interstate conventions. Never an Article 5 convention, but 41 interstate conventions, 11 before 1787, and we've had approximately 30 since 1787. We have the rules for almost all of them. We have the notes of the proceedings for almost all of them. None of those conventions has ever exceeded their committee. None of them, zero of them. We have no history of a runaway convention in all of American history. Our opponents will say, oh, but Mark, 1787, the Constitutional Convention, was a runaway convention. And they will say those men went to the convention to amend the Articles of Confederation. And so if they went there and all they were tasked with doing is amending the Articles of Confederation, and they created an entirely new constitution, I guess you could call that a runaway convention. That would be a fair characterization, right? How do we know what they were tasked with doing? We know because each delegate to convention, they're actually called commissioners, carried a commission. Literally a piece of paper that said what their authority was. I've read them. It's super arcane. I don't know a lot of people have read them. The first person in modern American history to read them was Professor Rob Adelson. Went to the Library of Congress or the National Archives. Like I picture it. It's like the movie National Archives. You try to pull them out of a drawer, glue the dust off. I'm sure it's not like that. That's kind of what I picture. And he pulled them out and he read them. And by the way, he was an opponent of the use of Article 5 when he started this research. And he went there and he pulled these commissions out of the drawer and nobody had ever looked at them. And when 7 of the 9 commissions, because 9 states initially attended, 7 of the 9 commissions said, the commissioner has any and all authority necessary to render the federal constitution adequate with the exigencies of the Union. Nothing about the Articles of Confederation. No limitation on their any and all power necessary. And by the way, when they say to render the federal constitution, there was no such thing as a federal constitution as we do it. There wasn't a document called the Constitution. There were the Articles of Confederation, but no constitution. The word constitution back then, what they meant was the Constitution, the way our government is constituted. So go there and fix it. Like that's what they were told to do. Why do people think it was a runaway? They think it was a runaway because after 7 states, starting with Virginia, called for the convention, Congress did what Congress does. They went, oh, wow, the wind's blowing. Looks like there's going to be a convention. We should say something about this. And what they said was, we recommend the states gather in convention to amend the Articles of Confederation, and then they also added the other language and do whatever else is necessary to fix the government, right? But people take that language where it says amend the Articles of Confederation, they say that's what the convention is called for. Important to note, the Articles of Confederation didn't have a clause giving Congress the power to call a convention. And they knew it because they only issued a recommendation. They didn't say we're calling a convention. They said we recommend because they understood the law and they knew they couldn't call a convention. So that's why some people believe that the folks who went to that convention were only tasked with amending the Articles of Confederation. I also just want you to think about it in context. We all revere the framers of the Constitution. We think they were incredible men of great honor, and many of them were. And honor in that day was held in such high esteem that if I said to you, you went to that convention, you breached your oath, your state told you that you weren't allowed to do this, and you did it, you could literally say, I challenge you to a duel, sir. And you could kill me for saying that because it's not true. And we know that that happened. Actually, we all know the story, right? Hamilton and Burr. It actually happened. And so imagine George Washington sitting at convention. He's the president of convention. You guys have seen that famous chair with the rising sun on the back of it. He's sitting up on the dais above the convention. I've been there in Independence Hall. The real chair is actually there in Independence Hall. Imagine Washington sitting up there going, seems like they're doing a whole bunch of stuff we're not allowed to do. Let's just not tell anybody, okay? George Washington, John Adams, Sam Adams, Madison. Imagine all these guys doing that. These guys believed in honor and integrity. There's no way they would do that. So 1787 wasn't a runaway convention. That's something I'll fight for the rest of my life, is to clear the slander that's issued by our opponents against the framers of our great Constitution. So the 38 states tell us you can't be a runaway. There's a whole bunch of other reasons. We can get into that stuff if people want to ask questions about it. I'm happy to talk about all that. What I'm here to do is tell you that when I travel around the country, all the much more conservative states in America that have passed the Convention of States resolution, I'm like, I'm going to Wyoming. Like, why are you going to Wyoming? They haven't passed it yet. They're like, what? Why hasn't Wyoming passed it? Like, they can't believe y'all haven't passed it. There's Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Arkansas. I mean, these are red states. And they're like, oh, is it because they're more liberal up there? I'm like, no, it's not. That's not the problem. It's just there's these myths about the runaway convention and all that, and some people are afraid of it. And there's none. So I'm here to tell you the rest of the country is looking at y'all, and they want you to support what they've already done so that we can do our best to save the nation. And so that's why I'm here to ask for your support. If you want to volunteer, we have a sheet up here that allows you to volunteer. If you want to fill out our petition, we ask if you haven't signed the petition yet, please do so. We're not giving up here in Wyoming. We'll never give up. I was here last year. I'm here this year. I'll be back again shortly. I'm coming back in the winter, if that shows you how dedicated I am. People are like, when do you want to come back? I'm like, I like Wyoming in the winter. People are like, what's wrong with you? But I love it here any time of year, and so I'm going to be back. I think you have your legislature is super interesting. There's a lot of conflict going on there. You know, it's going on all over the country. Wish I could tell you you're unique, but we're going to get it done here in Wyoming. We're going to get it done with your help. So I'll close with that, and I'll open it up for questions. And one rule super important on questions for me, so that we honor everybody here, which is, you know, there are folks who organize this meeting. They put their time, effort, and money, drove across the state to be here. And so I'm here as a speaker. If you guys can ask questions and try to keep them succinct, so that I get to answer everybody's questions. I'll stick around as long as y'all want. If you want to talk to me afterwards and not do it in front of the crowd, that's fine too. Pretty much any question, I'll answer it as best I can, and as, you know, always honestly, but as best I can. But if you stand up and you're like want to give a speech, I'll probably interrupt you. I'll do my best not to be rude. Mama raised me better than that. But if people start speech fine, then I'm going to stop you so that we can give everybody a chance to answer the question. So I'll close with that. Yes, ma'am, right in your front row, you get it.
You bet. That's what I said.
I like it.
I want to know if there's a guarantee that the liberals cannot screw up what we're trying to do.
So, did everybody get a chance to hear that? Okay, good. I just thought, and I'll repeat it if folks don't hear it. The liberals will try to screw up what we're trying to do. 100%. They're already trying to screw up what we're trying to do. There was a press release and a major multi-billion-dollar effort run by Common Cause, which is George Soros's main policy arm. It's a big policy organization. And on their website, if you just search on the web for Common Cause and Convention of States, you'll find they have, I don't even know how many dozens of pages now, but they spend millions of dollars a year attacking Convention of States. And it's very rare that I say that the left is telling the truth. There is something they say on there that's very truthful. They say, we need to stop this because this is the most dangerous thing to the progressive agenda in all of history. And we're worried that they're trying to reverse the progressive agenda. And I read that, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's true. That is what we're trying to do, right? They run hit pieces against us. There's been hit pieces in New York Magazine, Atlantic Magazine, Amazon Prime. I don't watch any TV really, but apparently there's a very anti-Christian show called Shiny Happy People. It's the most watched show on Amazon right now. And this season, somebody texted me like, hey, you guys are on Shiny Happy People. I don't even know what that is. And they sent me a clip, and there's some weird thing, they're attacking some teen Christian camp, and in the middle of it, they break away, and there's some poor, misguided kid with blue hair and blue fingernails saying how dangerous and horrible a Convention of States is. And so they're constantly attacking us, trying to throw dirt in the cause to prevent us from doing this. To get more specific, they're going to get to convention. Like when we go to convention, all 50 states will come to convention. And they're going to try and screw it up at convention, for sure. The main thing they're going to try and do is to prevent us from doing it. That's their goal. I think the fear that people have is, well, we're going to get to convention, they'll take over convention, and they'll do something crazy at convention. So 2 things I have to say to that. If they believed that, they wouldn't be spending all this time and money going to war against us, right? Because if they thought that there could be a runaway convention and they could take it over and they could do away with the Second Amendment or something, like, of course. They would either just sit back and let us do what we're doing, right? But they certainly wouldn't spend millions of dollars fighting us. When we go into the legislature here or anywhere else, League of Women Voters testifies against us. Yeah. Planned Parenthood testifies against us. Sierra Club testifies against us. Common Cause they're all, by the way, paid lobbyists from all of those groups. And I'm sorry to say, sometimes they're literally sitting at the same table. You get Planned Parenthood sitting next to the John Birch Society and Eagle Forum. I look at that, I'm like, that is the weirdest. I want to be really clear, they're not working together, right? Like the John Birch side does not work with Planned Parenthood ever, right? The John Birch side is made up of conservative people who disagree on this issue, but they end up on the same side of the issue as literally now every America-hating, communist, socialist, baby-killing organization in America, and they use the exact same talking points. The first legislature I ever went into was Montana, and I got a hold, I can't remember the org now, I apologize, but I got an email somebody gave me like, look, here's an email from the leading liberal group in the state, and they're saying, use the John Birch Society talking points, they're our friends on this issue. It was just unbelievable. So you get into convention, what the left is going to do is just try and stop us from doing anything. That's going to be their main thing. And then people are worried, well, what if they try to do something like, let's say they try to repeal the Second Amendment. You have to remember, it takes 34 states to call the convention, which is a supermajority in convention, right? Way more than half of the states, 2/3 of the states. 34 states have agreed in advance to what the lanes of the convention are, those 3 things that I told you about. They all agreed in advance. We're not talking about anything else. And when they send their commissioners, that's all their commissioners are commissioned to talk about.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed. Because that's the only legal authority. And this is not just the law of Article 5. If you know anything about business law, like a lot of you guys have been in business, maybe have a business insurance policy, even a homeowner's policy. The guy that got you that policy, or the gal that got you that policy is your agent, right? That's what they're commonly known as. The agent has authority to act on your behalf, to bind a policy to protect you, right? And so let's say you say to your insurance agent, I want $1 million personal liability policy, right? And you say, that's all I want. I give you the authority to go out and get that policy for me. Now they come back to you and they say, you are so lucky because I got you a $10 million policy. It's only going to cost you 5 times as much though. And you're now bound to that policy. You're not bound to that policy because they're your agent and they only have the authority that you gave them. When the states commission their commissioners, those are agents of the state. They act under the authority and the auspices of the state. And they can only bind the state to what the state gives them authority to bind them to. So even if you assume, which is crazy, but let's assume your legislature sends people to the convention and they start to vote to repeal the Second Amendment, right? Their vote doesn't even count because they don't have the authority to do that. Your legislature retains authority over them and can remove them from convention anytime. This isn't 1787. We'll be watching this thing 24/7, real time, on cameras in the convention hall. Your legislature will be in constant communication with their delegation. There's literally no way for them to get out of control. One last thing I want to say is, let's assume they do. Let's just assume they get completely, everything I'm saying is wrong, maybe. Okay? It's not, but let's assume it is. And they pass out of convention an amendment to repeal the Second Amendment. Okay? I know, terrifying, right? Guns are my son and my hobby. He's a Marine, and we like to build guns as our father-son project, so we're not into that. Let's say they pass that thing out. First of all, it's outside the scope of the authority of convention. It would be challenged legally. Every conservative lawyer in the United States of America would immediately file litigation on that. I know lots of them. Can't necessarily rely on the courts, but, right, so I don't like federal courts. I don't like litigating in the federal courts because you don't know what's going to happen. But here's what I do know. I can do basic math. Currently, 27 states are constitutional carry states, meaning you don't need a permit, right? You go buy your gun, put it in your holster on your hip, you leave the store, and you can carry your gun. 27 states, and growing. Florida was the last one. 24 states, and I don't know if that's true here, 24 states allow you to carry your handgun in the Capitol. Are you guys allowed to do that here? No? We gotta get to work on that. In Texas, by the way, this is one thing I will brag on Texas. We have a fast pass lane for carry holders. Like if you're carrying your gun into the Capitol, you can just show, if you got a permit, you don't require a permit, you got a permit, which I do, you show it to the security guys, it's a fast pass that, thank you for bringing your handgun into the Capitol. So I love that. So you have 24 states that allow you to carry your handgun in the Capitol. There are currently 14 states that allow you to take a loaded AR into the Capitol. You can even chamber it around, sling it across your back, and sit in the gallery and watch the proceedings. Now, I don't recommend that. Seems like a little extreme to me, but you can do that. I've run into people in capitals that are carrying ARs in the Capitol, and the security's used to it. It's normal in those places. If we have 14 states that allow you to carry your AR into the Capitol loaded, do we really think we can't get 13 states to say no to the repeal of the Second? I'm like, it's just ridiculous. It's a fever dream. And I still have people all the time like, oh, Mark, we're going to lose the Second Amendment. They either can't do math or they're just being dishonest. So there really is, I can absolutely guarantee you, no, there's no way to lose our Constitution in this process. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. I'll come to you next. Yeah, you first.
Okay.
Because you have a dog shirt on, and I'm a Great Dane guy, so anybody who loves dogs, I'm in.
Thank you. I didn't know I was a dog lover until I retired after teaching.
What kind of dog do you have?
A toy poodle. She's rehomed. She doesn't know she's a poodle. She's okay.
They're some of the smartest dogs. I love poodles.
But
All right, we've done enough dog talk.
yeah,
Now you can ask a question.
definitely not. You know, I'm a lefty.
Okay.
But I come to understand.
Yeah.
You know, just
Yeah.
like I would hope that you guys
No, I love that.
to understand the
Yeah.
other side.
I love talking to everybody.
Same here.
Yeah,
So I come to understand, and I really don't understand. There's probably like 100 questions.
yeah, go.
But one
Let's start.
I will, is education.
Yeah.
Why do you think it's so important to get rid of the Department of Education?
Very
So,
important.
what's that?
Very important.
Yeah, so here's why.
Okay, I want to hear.
Here's the most important, what I'm calling, I think you could give ideological reasons, like I could give you the conservative reason. I don't think that's the best reason. I think the best reason is just, again, math. We've literally spent hundreds of billions of dollars from the Department of Education. Remember, that money leaves your state, goes to Washington, D.C., and then they only give you a portion of it back, which to me, I don't even get that. Like, why are they taking part of our money out of Wyoming that we could spend on our own kids, on our own education? It goes to DC, and here's what we've gotten out of that since the advent of the Department of Education. At the very best, 0 increase in test scores. That's the best case scenario. That's the most favorable survey that's ever been done of test scores across the United States. When you average them out across all the states, we've spent hundreds of billions of dollars on a bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. that, in my opinion, is depriving your kids and your grandkids of educational dollars. And I just hate that. And I really believe that you here in Wyoming, and I'm even more of a localist on this, that you here in your own town, in your own school districts, are better suited to decide how to educate your kids. It's different in New York City. I travel the whole country. Again, all 49 of the 50 states I'm in it. And New York, down in Manhattan, is nothing like this place. And there's a different culture there, and people want to educate their kids differently. My belief is New Yorkers should educate their kids how they want. I come from Los Angeles. Angelinos should educate their kids how they want, and so should people here. And they shouldn't take your money away from you, filter it through Washington, D.C., through a giant bureaucracy with thousands of employees, and then send you a portion of it back with strings attached that tell you how you have to educate your kids. And from my perspective, again, I come from California, I don't necessarily agree with most of the politics in California. Well, see, there's the difference,
I'm
right?
hoping to win the lottery.
Okay, so there's the difference.
Yeah.
But so here's the deal. Like, if you like it there, I love the fact in the United States you can move there and you can take advantage of the education system there the way that you like it. And then Wyoming can do something different and Texas can do, that's the way I think it should be. By the way, that's the entire purpose in a nutshell of Convention of States. My goal is to return the people to self-governance. I don't know why these people in Washington, D.C., the smart people, they're no smarter than you guys. In fact, in a lot of cases, they've shown that they're less smart than you guys. I think they are, by and large, they live kind of in a bubble. I think they're isolated from the rest of us in the country. I know a lot of people in D.C. By the way, I don't say that it's not a left-right thing. People in D.C. are super isolated. They live in this self-reinforcing bubble. We all do that. Like, if we live here, mostly we hang out with people who are mostly like us. It's a bubble. And so they just have a different perspective. I don't see why we would want to give them power over our lives. And the Constitution itself has 17 enumerated powers. And I would say that this one, I don't know what the real number is, but I'm saying it has 17,000 powers in it. And I'll give you one specific example. I'll close with this on the Department of Education. The Constitution doesn't give the federal government any power to be involved in education. You can't find it. If you read this one, you will not find it in there. It came out of a series of decisions around what's called the Commerce Clause, and they said that, well, education affects interstate commerce, so the federal government can be involved in education. That's where the power comes from. There's a whole rabbit hole we could go down by why I think that's wrong. But aside from that, like, this is Jefferson, who was a huge advocate of public education, right? Number one in the founding era. He believed that if we didn't have an educated populace, we would lose our country. And so he believed in public education. He was founding the University of Virginia. And the way we text with our friends, they wrote letters like that. I mean, they were prolific, the number of letters these guys wrote. They had no other way to communicate. And his closest friend was William Henry Lee. And there's a letter between he and William Henry Lee where Lee suggests that Jefferson get money from the federal government for the University of Virginia. And Jefferson says, well, you can't do that. That's unconstitutional. We would need an education amendment in order to do that. We don't have an education amendment. So when the federal government puts money into education, one, it's unconstitutional. We can figure out how to fix that. But two, I just don't think it serves the local population, and that's who's consuming that education.
You've got some good points, very good. I mean, that helps me
Yeah.
understand where you're coming from. My concern is you have one child who's here in Wyoming, and Wyoming has its own thing.
Right.
They moves to Utah, they have their own thing.
Mhm.
Move to California,
Yep.
they have, and so there's no continuity at all. That's what I see.
Yeah, so look, I understand that point. Here's why I disagree with that point. Because our country was designed not to have continuity. Specifically, it was intended for lack of continuity. You know, our system is based around the idea of federalism. Federalism is fascinating to me. Federalism is a system of government designed for people who don't like each other. It's like the weirdest thing.
Yeah, it's supposed to be small.
What's that?
It's supposed to be small, make sure the states get along, that's all it's there for.
Right, because, so the framers are they're there in the hall, and we kind of have this fantasy that they're all sitting at TV and having these wonderful intellectual discussions, and instead they're doing things like, you're a scumbag, and you people in your state, you're blasphemers, and you're only in it for your own self-interest. They're like, literally, Franklin says that the convention almost came apart 3 times. Everybody threatened to leave, they hated each other's guts, so federalism comes out of that. Because what federalism says is, this is not personal to you, I like you, but it says, I don't like you, and I don't trust you, you're just a blasphemer, and you're a thief, And I'm not giving you any power over my state. That's ridiculous. Why would I give you any power? But we all understand that there are certain things that we must do together. If we're going to do international trade, we're going to be much more powerful in a trading bloc of all the states. If we're going to defend our borders, well, we got to do that nationally. So there were certain things that they said, well, we kind of have to do these things together, but everything else we should do separately. And then one last thing I want to say about it, and this is, I don't want to insult you, so I'm going to say this is.
That's okay, I'm proud to be a lefty.
Yeah, so this is.
Even more left than the left.
Yeah, so this is it's a different philosophical approach from the left to the right. Okay, so when I talk to people on the left about this issue, about education, and I say, they say what you said, like, what about the kid in Wyoming versus the kid in New York City? And this is what I hear all the time. People on the left who are not Christians or not Jews or not believers in any way will say to me, well, you're going to teach your kids like crazy stuff like creation. And we can't have that in the schools, right? And I say, okay, well, if you believe that, let's say I take control and conservatives take control of the education system. Now I'm going to force the kids in New York to study creation. What do you think about that? They're like, oh, heck no. Like, so you think it's okay to prohibit me or to tell me what I have to teach my kids, but you're also not okay with me teaching you and telling your kids what they have to learn. People on the right generally are not like that. Like on the right, we're not. We generally, I bet you I can say, ask everybody in this room.
I grew up, born and raised in Utah.
Right.
Only 2 brown families in the whole town.
Right.
I used to have to go to primary so kids could play with me.
Well,
So
but
you bring they
No, but I'm
didn't have-
talking-
but they were talking about school.
I'm talking, hold on a second, I'm talking about what the government mandates in education. What conservatives will tell you, and by the way, to be fair, Utah is kind of a unique situation on its own because there's such a heavy LDS influence and the church has such deep influence in that state that it is different. Most conservatives would say, well, teach your kids whatever you want in New York. Like, that's not my business. I live in Wyoming. But that's not what I find people on the left say about me in Texas. They're like, I have to tell you what your kids are going to learn in Texas, or you're going to raise little Neanderthals. And I'm like, well, it can't go both ways. Like, it's got to be either whoever's in control of the government gets to tell all the kids and all the parents, or not.
Why can't they have both?
How can you have the federal government tell you what to do and then they don't tell you what to do? It's one or the other. Either the federal government.
But that's why you have your standards for every child learns the same.
Why does the federal government set the standards? Is it because people in Wyoming are too dumb to set their own standards? Well, I know, because they're not. Right, because they're not. And you're smart enough to help set the standards here in Wyoming. I have faith in you to get together with your neighbors and help set the standards. So that's why the
I
Department
mean,
of
it's not been that long ago we had standards.
Well, we have standards in every single state.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, it's not where everybody's had the same standard.
By the way, you know which state is at the top of education performance right now? Number 1? Take a guess.
I'm retired.
It's Mississippi. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
4 years ago, one of the worst. They have the largest rise, I wouldn't say they're number 1, but the largest rise in educational testing scores over the last 4 years of any state.
You know, I'm gonna have to check that out.
It's true, yeah, well, look, they're not number 1. I think Florida's number 1, but they've had the largest, I think Florida's number 1. But Mississippi's had the largest rise. They took over all their
Well, that's because
education.
they were dead.
But they're like number 4 in the country. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. So,
And I don't care if you're an R, but look at her doing her. I don't care, as long as you do what's right.
yeah, so I think we return it to the local level. That's the purpose. You had a question? Oh,
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you being here.
I thought that was a good explanation on education. So you seem to be pretty confident that the states would never ratify anything unwise. Let's just say that.
I mean, certainly I would say that's not always been true historically. I mean, I think we have an example in the 17th Amendment, which I
would
really
agree with that.
Yeah.
Mid-16th Amendment, the income tax, we
Yeah.
have the 18th Amendment.
But I mean,
So
I
how
would
do you
also say,
explain,
yeah,
that, because that seems to be something that
Yeah.
goes against your talking points, that, don't worry, nothing bad can happen, they can be added to the Constitution.
so if I was alive when the 17th Amendment was passed, I would have voted to ratify. And the reason I would have, I hate the 17th Amendment. It's been a complete disaster. But if you look at the history of the 17th Amendment, the reason for the 17th Amendment was that they believed that in order to become a senator, you had to be rich and well-connected. Because senators used to be appointed by the state legislatures. So what you had is a bunch of rich fat cats that ended up in the Senate, and they all said, well, this is just cronyism. And so I think, that comes out of what was called, it was originally grown out of what's called the Progressive Farmers Movement in the late 1800s. It ultimately reaches its zenith in the Wilson administration. 1913 is when we get the 17th Amendment. By the way, I think the worst year in American political history, we get the 17th Amendment, the 16th Amendment, the Fed, and the one that most people don't realize, which is called the Reapportionment Act of 1913. You ever wonder why the House of Representatives has 435 people in it? It's a super weird number. 50 in the Senate, right? 50 states, 100 in the Senate, and then you've got this 435 number. Where's that come from? Well, in 1913, they just said, yeah, that's enough. We're done adding people. Based on the original formula, I think the number today would be over 7,000 people in the House of Representatives. Some of my friends on the left would say to me, well, yeah, if you had 7,000 people in the House of Representatives, you couldn't hardly get anything done. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Like, I like that. A little bit of gridlock would be good for us. Anyway, so I think if you look at 17th Amendment in context, I think they were addressing a real problem. They just had the wrong solution over the long haul. Because, they were trying to prevent rich, powerful people from being the only people in the Senate. And today, now in the Senate, it's mostly rich, powerful people who can become senators, right? Self-funders, people who have money interest. So I think they were addressing the problem. So would I say that it's possible that you could pass an amendment that someday we might decide 100 years later that wasn't a great thing to do? Of course, like human beings do things. There are things that we don't see in context in the current situation. I think we could say that about the framers. The framers actually said that about themselves. They said, we've done the best we can with this Constitution, with what we know now. We believe that people will come later than us that will have the wisdom of experience and they'll improve upon what we've done. No generation is perfect. If you're, especially if you're a Christian, you don't believe that human beings can be perfected. And so we'll do the best we can. So I would never say that in looking at something in hindsight, we would say, well, that was perfectly done, and I'm so glad we did. Yeah, we're not perfect and we're not prescient. But what I said, I want to make one last point of clarity on that, which is, do I believe right now that we could pass anything that you or I would look at and think is bad as a conservative? I would say absolutely not. Yeah. So that's a distinction.
Well, can I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, for sure.
One thing that I think you might not be considering is that the ratification is not just done at like 1 year.
No, on average it's 18 months.
Is of course the extreme example. That took over 200 years to
Yeah.
ratify.
One of my friends was responsible for that ratification.
Yeah, well,
in Texas.
but it
Yeah.
is a realistic possibility.
It's not, here's why I would say it's not, just to clarify.
What state legislatures will do in the future.
They set no ratification timeline on those amendments, and that's why.
Sometimes they do.
Well, in modern history, we've not had any without ratification
Yeah,
timelines. And so they will set a
but
ratification.
you can't, none of us can say this specific language will come out of a convention.
Of course. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Right.
Right.
I mean, you can say, well, that's the way it's been done in the 20th century, but does that mean that's, if we have a convention, that they will say, well, this is null and void after 7 years, like the ERA was, or
Right.
whatever. So I think, making these big assumptions
Mhm.
is pretty dangerous.
So the only kinds of assumptions I ever make are based on historical precedent. Patrick Henry,
Okay.
in Patrick Henry's,
3 amendments
right
there.
Well, in Patrick Henry's famous speech, Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death, this whole speech is fantastic, and most people have never read the whole thing, but we know the last line from Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death. He said one thing, he's talking about, we're pleading to the king to be nice to us, basically, and he says, I have no other lamplight by which my feet can be guided than the lamplight of history. And that's all I have to guide my feet. The lamplight of history shows us that the vast majority of amendments, and all the amendments in the modern era, anything that was proposed in modern history, has a timeline set to it. And they understood that they had a problem with those original amendments that didn't have a timeline on them. So you would have to show me some historical precedent that, like, why would modern people have always had time? Not, like, I can always make up a horror story out of whole cloth and say, well, maybe, but I have to have some historical precedent. And the average amendment was approved in a year and a half, 18 months is the average time.
I don't know that that's making up something. I mean, these are things that actually happen in history. So it's not really conjecture.
Right, but it happened 243 years ago, or 42 years ago, and it hasn't happened since. And so to me, that means we have a long historical record of that thing not happening. We haven't had duels in this country for a very long time, so I don't expect it.
I kind of lost where you went with that. What
In other words, we haven't had amendments in hundreds of years that had no timeline. So I don't expect that we would not, and I don't, like, I'm in all the legislatures, I've never met a legislator that says we would have a convention and we wouldn't put a timeline on it. I've never met that person. Maybe they exist. Maybe you've met them.
Well,
I'd like to be introduced to them.
I mean, who knows who's going to be part of a convention?
But see, this is
a big question mark.
To me, to me, Eldon, this is the weakest argument that we face when people say, who knows? Because that's not even an argument.
I don't know. This is all all this assumption.
But who knows is not an argument. Like, I can say who knows about it. Who knows if there will be an election next year? I don't know if there will be an election.
No, but I mean,
I don't know.
You have all this stuff. You come and you say, well, we know exactly how this will run.
Right. We have tons of historical precedent. Absolutely we do.
You're referring to, you're conflating conventions about water compacts with amending the U.S. Constitution.
Well, I'm not conflating. I'm open about what those are. I'm not conflating them. I'm saying they weren't. I mean, I said openly they were not Article 5 conventions. So that's not conflation. I made the distinction.
Adequately even compare those.
What's that? Because
This is like, saying we had a special session here in Wyoming and say, well, that one for making law here is going to work the same as making amendments or proposing amendments.
a legislative session in a state has nothing to do with an interstate convention. They're not the same.
Of course.
They're not even close to the same.
But but what you have come here and said is we had 30 different conventions.
41.
40. Okay. Whatever.
11 before 1787, 36.
And you say, this establishes precedent that applies to a convention for proposing amendments to the U.S. Constitution.
I never said precedent. Did I say that? I never said that. See, this is what our opponents always do. They put words in our mouth, they say we're conflating, they say who knows, they say I'm saying things that I don't say. I'm very careful with my language. I don't say things I don't mean. I didn't call it precedent. I'm a lawyer, I understand precedent. I know what that means. It's binding legal precedent. Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Oh, please,
Yes,
please, I
yes.
want to listen to you. Can we move it on? If you want to talk money and talk about this other thing, you go right ahead. But I want to hear from these people, not just constantly.
Yes, ma'am, I'm with you.
Oh, right.
Thank you for being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you for being a doctor. Anybody else have a question? Did you have a question?
Oh,
You're on the spot now.
okay. I think this is fantastic. I truly do. And we are in trouble. There's no doubts about it. And the only thing that's going to get us out of trouble is God. If we stay close to
Amen.
God, we pray to Him and ask Him, please help our fellow, elected officials. Please wake up.
Amen.
Yes.
Please follow you to save America. And that's the only way we're going to be saved.
Yeah. And just, Marlene, you want to add something?
Well, I was just gonna say, and Helen tells us to pray for our leaders. It's not a big question. I just feel like I'm really thirsty for something on, if you were to elaborate on the 10th Amendment.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hear a lot of people will say, we should just use the 10th Amendment. And I'm a huge fan of the 10th Amendment. I think it's an important part of our Constitution. Unfortunately, the federal courts have primarily defanged the 10th Amendment. And if you look at the jurisprudence around the 10th Amendment, precedent, in this case, actual real precedent, What the courts mostly say, which blows my mind because I don't see any basis for it, I read the cases, is they said that the states don't have standing to sue under the 10th Amendment. Like, which is unbelievable. Like, I've read the cases, I don't understand the jurisprudence. I think it's made up. And like a lot of stuff that the courts do, in my opinion. One of the things I think that we should do in convention, which I didn't mention earlier, is I think in convention we should propose an amendment to give the states automatic standing to sue under the 10th Amendment. If a state wants to sue the federal government when they believe the federal government is intruding on state power, they should automatically have standing. Standing, by the way, I'm saying a legal word, forgive me. Basically, in order to be in court, you have to have a legal right to be in court on the issue. So the best example I know is if we're sitting here and we hear 2 cars crash out there, and so they've gotten in an accident, and you run out and you go, I'm going to sue you for hitting that other car, we don't have standing. You weren't injured. That's not your accident. You're not involved in that situation. So the idea that the courts, federal courts have said that states don't have standing to sue under the 10th Amendment, a lot of states have said this, and a lot of courts have said this, it's an outrage to me, and I think we should create automatic standing. If we do that, it'll be a very strong tool for the states to step up. There's a lot of good attorneys general in the United States now, in conservative states, and it gives them more power to stand up against the federal government. So I would love to see that. Right now, it's just a weak remedy for us, unfortunately, because of what the courts have done to us. Does that make sense? Yeah, it frustrates me. Ted Cruz was one of the early scholars at the 10th Amendment Center in Texas, at Texas Public Policy Foundation. He would tell you the same thing. It's just frustrating. We should have these rights under the 10th Amendment,
Yeah.
and they've been mostly stripped away by the federal courts. So, this is another thing, like, well, just the federal courts have no right to do that. Well, yeah, maybe, but like, so then what's our remedy? Short of, violence, what's the remedy? If the courts do this and we don't agree with it, and the Supreme Court won't overrule them, I think we should continue to file those suits. Maybe someday get into the Supreme Court, and I hope we get the court to overturn it. The court generally doesn't like to do big things. The Supreme Court, the way it's structured, the way their jurisprudence is generally structured, is they try and do the smallest thing they possibly can on any given case. I'm not saying that as a criticism, just a reality about it. If there's 10 issues in the case and they can rule on the tiniest issue and be done with the case, that's what they try to do. So I think it would be very hard, I would hope that they would do it, it would be very hard to get one of those cases in front of the court to get the kind of ruling that you were hoping. So that's kind of the 10th Amendment. I also hear people, like there's a lot of people, this is going on here in this state, I think it's a really good thing. What do they call it, the federal review? So they're trying to put together a committee in the legislature to review all federal legislation, and that committee would make a determination whether that legislation, the federal legislation, is constitutional or not. I'm completely 100% in favor of that. The more the states educate themselves about what the federal government's doing and whether it actually has legal jurisdiction to do those things, I think that's really good. The question then becomes, okay, so now we have a list of things we think they shouldn't be able to do. What do we do about that? Somebody said to me last night in Evanston, which I appreciate this point, well, that stuff's just unconstitutional, and so the states just shouldn't listen. The states should push back against that, and I said, yeah, I totally agree with that. How many states are doing that right now? And he said, well, I mean, we came close in Wyoming last year in session, and I said, yeah, I love that, thank God, I appreciate that. How many states are actually doing that? And the answer is 0. Like, so I'm a political realist. I want to do things that we have a chance of doing because of what I started this with is I want my kids to know that I tried to do something that could fix the country for them. So I want the states all learning their roles, learning their authority vis-a-vis the federal government, because they're supposed to have a lot of authority vis-a-vis the federal government. I want them to take that power back, but I think the best way to do that is no. That's just my opinion.
Can you talk about nullification a little bit and why, well,
Yeah.
just the whole thing around.
So nullification is the idea that a state can look at a law and just say, that's not constitutional, and so we're not going to follow that law. I think the Supreme Court has said definitively that you can't do that. I don't necessarily think the Supreme Court was right on that. I'm just saying that's what the Supreme Court has said. But again, this is a really important thing for me. I like to win. I don't like to lose. And so I try to, and it's not always the case. Sometimes I want to have a fight just to have a fight because I think it's a fight worth having. Nullification is a losing fight. When you say nullification, 50% of the country will automatically say slavery. Because that was the South's argument against any anti-slavery laws, like we just nullify them, so we don't have to deal with the federal government says. And so people will be like, oh, by the way, we hear this anyway. Oh, I hear this in legislatures, you're trying to bring back slavery. And so when you say nullification, because that was one of the main arguments in the South, people are gonna say slavery, and now you're gonna have a debate about, don't be ridiculous, we're not trying to bring back slavery. I don't know if you remember, there was a woman, I think it was in Maine, who ran for the Senate, and she was in an interview, and people were accusing her of being a witch. And she said, I'm not a witch. And that became the campaign against her, was she said, I'm not a witch. You guys remember? I don't remember her name. It's kind of hilarious. But you don't ever want to have to say, I'm against slavery. That's not a good argument. It's not a good narrative. And there's people who, in this state, by the way, who clipped a speech that I gave, where I'm talking about narrative and how important narrative is. And they use this, I'll say it here openly, they use it against me by saying, oh, Meckler's just saying stuff, right? It's talking about narrative. Narrative is important in politics. The things that you stand for are the most important thing. What are your values? What are your principles? What are you fighting for? But how do you talk about it actually matters. Like, this is why people, I don't, but this is why people hire consultants to tell them how to talk about the issues that they care about. Because you can say the same thing in two different ways. And one way people are like, well, that seems like a good idea. And the other way is people are like, well, that guy sounds like a madman. So you want to make sure, as you're talking about things in public, that's why I said I'm super careful with my words, because actually narrative matters. Things that come out of your mouth, and the way you talk about things, and the way you frame issues, actually matters when we're talking to people in public. And those of us who speak in public have an obligation to create a proper narrative around things that they're talking about. Always fundamentally truthful, honest, with integrity, but then how you talk about it still matters. You can be truthful, horribly rude and mean and terrible also, while you're still being truthful, but that matters how you talk about things. So nullification, there's one last thing that I say half joking about nullification, but maybe I'm only 1/4 joking. I say nullification is a great methodology for people who hate their pigs and their rabbits. And the reason I say that is because we in the States, on a legislative basis, are very small compared to the federal government. Have you guys meet, how long is your legislature meet for?
40 or 20?
Okay, 40 days and 20 days. Congress meets year-round, and it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry with literally tens of thousands of lobbyists whose job is to pass laws, often laws that we don't like in the States. And we could nullify a law, and Congress could repass that law. It's slightly different. We'd have to nullify it again, and they could repass it again, and we'd have to, we're going to lose that battle forever. Nullification is just not a practical remedy for standing against the federal government. And the last thing I would say about it, and this is what I say to a lot of people who have other ideas, this is not the silver bullet, what I'm proposing. I want people pursuing other ideas. I think that's really important. Call me when 5 or 8 or 10 states are doing nullification. And if they're actually doing it and it's effective, and then I would say, okay, hey, maybe that's gonna work. But I've been hearing about nullification since I was in 8th grade, in my civics class or whatever it's called. And I'm not aware of any state that's nullified. And so until I actually see that happening anywhere, or I see maybe a big citizen movement behind nullification where hundreds of thousands of people are signing petitions, millions of people are signing petitions for nullification, then I just don't think it's a realistic remedy. And so I really like realistic remedies. I'm looking for things, I don't mind if they're a stretch. Like convention states is a stretch, it's super hard. So I don't mind that. We should fight hard battles, big battles. But if I don't see any movement towards something and it doesn't look like it can be done, then to me I want to fight for things that can be done. Yes?
This might just be in a brochure, you can tell me.
Yeah.
But I was wondering which states have passed this or ratified or whatever. What states do you think are doable or kind of close? Or
So my memory's not good enough. You're all 19 states. You can look on our website.
It's up here.
Oh, it's right there. It's on the map.
So what states do you think are
So I would say like kind of precedent
you have multiple, right?
Yeah, I'd say Kansas is one super interesting thing in Kansas. We passed it already several times in Kansas by a simple majority. Kansas has something in their state constitution that says it takes a 2/3 majority It was actually intended to protect Roe versus Wade. It was put in their constitution in 1974, the year after Roe versus Wade. Super interesting history. There's no date on record about it. It just ends up in their constitution. It's just super weird. Everything else that was put in their constitution in 74, we can find all kinds of public debate on, but not that one. That's unconstitutional under the supremacy clause of the United States Constitution because it burdens the state's right to call an Article 5 convention. And so that one's being litigated by a couple legislators there. We think we're going to win that litigation. If we do, Kansas will be done. North Carolina has already passed the House. We've done that a few years in a row. It's installed in the Senate. There's a couple folks in the Senate that don't like it, for all the same reasons you've heard here. And the leadership there has just kind of protected them so they don't have to take the vote. We know we have the votes in the Senate, so that legislature is still in session right now. We're hoping to get that passed this year. Ohio is still in session this year. We're pretty sure we have the votes in both houses in Ohio. It's just a question. Oftentimes, it just depends on leadership, whether they're willing to bring something out of the spend on political capital. Matt Huffman, who runs that legislature, is a big Article 5 supporter. It's just a question of whether he wants to spend the capital to do it in this session. They're one of the evil legislatures that's year-round. So Ohio's on the docket. And then I would say over the next several years, I think Pennsylvania is super interesting. Their legislature is kind of a mess, but I think Republicans will take back the majority there. Virginia is questionable to me. I thought we were going to take the majority. Virginia's having an election this year. They're an off-year election, and it's going to flip back and forth between red and blue. If we get a red legislature, we'll pass there. So that's on my docket. I don't remember what else I got. Wyoming I'm hopeful about Wyoming. We passed the Senate with a 2/3 majority in the last session, so I think we've got a lot of strength there. There were some problems in the House, but we were not that far away, nothing that was discouraging to me. Same thing for Montana. We had a huge majority in one House, and we missed it by one vote in the other House, so we're very close in Montana. Idaho is another state. Again, that's a leadership issue in Idaho. So I'd say we've got 5 or 6 that are kind of reaching the finish line. It's a very incremental process. But people think you just, we'll go file it and we pass it. Like, you go file it and you don't get a vote. And you go file it next year, maybe you get a committee assignment, maybe you get a vote, and you lose. And that's kind of how it works. It's just you build on what you've done in years past. So I think we probably have 5 to 6 gigs in the docket next year. It's not over. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been doing convention estates in Wyoming for several years here, and we did get it through the Senate. The thing I wanted to say is Utah is in.
Yeah.
And how Utah did it, they did it with what they called some kind of parties. They would hold parties at their house. And what were they called? I can't remember. Some
Cottage
parties.
parties.
And they would bring people over, and it really went well for them. And they're paying at like number 15.
Yeah, they've been in for a lot of years.
They've been in for a lot of years, so we're kind of not there. I don't know. I go to the fair, I go out, I talk to people, I get.
But I would say here in this state, getting a supermajority in House, that doesn't happen very often. We had a couple other supermajorities this year. That's a big deal to get to a supermajority, and that shows you movement. When you've got one House that's that strongly in favor, that's a big sign of a state that's on the move, from my experience.
Well, that's good, but
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a long haul. Mike Harris, years ago, I was complaining about that it just takes a long time. It's hard, it's frustrating. That's when he told me it took him 25 years to get the homeschool movement done. And I'm a big fan of the Awakenings and studying the First and Second Awakenings. And George Whitefield was an itinerant pastor traveling the country in America before the American Revolution, 13, 15, 17 years before the American Revolution. And I was talking to David Barton. Any of you guys ever heard of David Barton? Great historian, right? He's a friend of mine, and I was hanging out with him, and I'm like, when George Whitefield was writing across, imagine he wrote across the entire country. It's estimated he gave over 30,000 sermons. Some outrageous percentage of the American public actually heard George Whitefield in person. I've seen his actual pulpit. He has this folding pulpit he designed, which he strapped to the back of his horse, riding in snow and heat. It's just amazing. I complain sometimes because I'm flying in airplanes around the country, right? He's on his horse. And I asked David Barton, what do you think George Whitefield would have said about the Great Awakening during the Great Awakening? And he said, it's hard. That's all he would have said, it's hard. And it wouldn't have even felt like the Great Awakening to him. He was just doing what he believed was right and what God had called him to do, but he was sick. He ultimately died from doing this. He was sick all the time when he was traveling around. People chased him out of town, like all the churches would chase him out of town. Mostly, he's not welcome in any church. He had to preach in open fields. And, when you do something big, it's hard. It's just the way it goes. So I would encourage anybody like you've been here for a long time, and I love you for that. I appreciate it so much. You're one of the George Whitfields of our era. Like you're in for the long haul, and people will remember people like that. We don't have gratitude for the summer soldier and the sunshine patriot. We have gratitude for the people who show up in winter when it doesn't look like you're necessarily going to win, but you keep fighting. It's probably time to close. If you'll give me permission, I'm going to close with one story. Maybe two. There's two stories I really love from American history. One is from the Declaration of Independence. I have a deck hanging on the wall next to my desk. It's like 5 feet away from me. And it's hand calligraphy. It's beautiful. I love these things. It's done by a woman in Texas. It takes her 3 days to do these things. It looks exactly like the original. The only difference on this one is I had a friend had it made for me. And you wouldn't ever notice it if you looked at it, but my signature's on it. And my wife's signature's on there. My friend's signature's on it. You'd never notice it if you looked at it. But I read it all the time. I don't sit there and read the whole thing, but I'll just stand up and stretch my legs, and I'm sitting at my desk for hours, and I'll read it, and it's wonderful. Like, it's such an important piece of American history. We focus a lot on the Constitution and the Declaration. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was reading it, and I came to the last paragraph. And you all know this. It says in there that we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Like, every one of you knows that by heart. Like, we all learned it in school. For some reason, that's one of the things we all memorize. What most people don't know is what it says right before that. And it's really interesting because it says what they pledge their honor, lives, fortune, and sacred honor to. Right? It says we pledge our lives, fortune, and sacred honor. So it's interesting. You think, well, what were they doing? They were starting a new country. It would be normal to say to this United States of America, we pledge our lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. That to me seems like the most logical thing, that they would be pledging lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. So you could say to the flag of the new country, maybe to the army, the army that was out there fighting, or was about to fight for independence, any of those things. But what it says is, to each other, we pledge our lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. And I think that's really incredible. Those were men who understood the moment. And what they were doing is they were signing their own death warrants. Literally, they were committing treason when they signed that document. And so I think it's fascinating because I think that's the only way we save the country. Like, we have to do this together. It's like if we're going to split apart and fight each other, it becomes impossible to save the country. We need to be together in this fight, those who believe the way that we believe. So I love that about the deck. The last story is a super interesting story I learned from David Barber. It's about John Quincy Adams, 6th president of the United States of America. He was a one-term president, relatively inconsequential as a president. Like, people don't talk much about his time as a president of the United States. What most people don't know is after he was president, he ran for Congress. Now, that to me in and of itself is just super weird. It's hard to imagine the president of the United States, he's now not president anymore, and he decides, I'm going to go be a junior member of Congress. I can imagine Donald Trump sitting in the back row in Congress, or Barack Obama, or any of the modern presidents. Like, anybody that you can think of, no, never, under no circumstances would any of them ever run for Congress. But there was a reason he did it. He did it because he was a radical abolitionist. Like, he believed that we had to end slavery. He thought it was a stain on the heart of America. We had to end it. Didn't do it during his presidency, couldn't do it during his presidency, so he said, I'm going to go try and do it in Congress. And he was in Congress, I think, 14 years. And ultimately, he died on the floor of Congress. If you go to Statuary Hall, if you've been to Congress, and in the middle of Congress, it's Statuary Hall, right? That used to be in the House of Representatives, a little plaque on the floor about his face. It shows where he fell. And they actually dragged him off, and he died in what's now, I think it's called the Ladies' Club. Anyway, not long before he died, a couple years before he died, a journalist came up to him and said, what's your problem? Like, all you do is you talk about abolition. Nobody else is interested in abolition. You don't get any bills on abolition. You're not interested in anything else. You're not trying to be in the power structure, be committee chair. Like, you don't care about anything else except for abolition. And we find you annoying. I'm paraphrasing. He's a journalist. He's harassing Adams. We find you annoying. Your colleagues find you annoying. What's your problem? And Adams says, Duty is ours, results belong to God. That's it. We can't know what's going to happen. The question is only, what do we have control over, and that's what we can do. And if we know what our duty is, and we work that duty, we do the things we can to execute what we believe is our duty, then we've done what we're supposed to do on earth. And I think that's what all of you are trying to do, is be aware of your duty and to live out that duty while you're here on this earth, as long as God gives you to do that. If we do that, we've lived the best life that we can, I think. If we do it in a way that honors God. That's my perspective on it. There's an interesting epilogue to that story, which is during John Quincy Adams' time in Congress, there was a young congressman in Congress who was fascinated by the fact that he was there with the former president. And he just thought this was absolutely incredible. And so he kind of followed him and studied what John Quincy Adams was all about, and he learned John Quincy Adams what he called the three-part plan for abolition and in slavery. And he was actually, he ended up being part of the committee that planned Adams' funeral. He was a first-term congressman, which is really amazing. And so he's doing all this stuff, he's totally influenced by Adams. Back then, most people don't realize, there were no primaries. Like, primaries are early 1900s invention. First primaries were in Wisconsin in the early 1900s. The way it used to work is the party would say, you're gonna run, and you're gonna run. And, you'd be like, okay, cool, I'll run. And the guy who was in there would be like, well, I'd like to run again. They're like, no, sorry, it's his turn. And so that happens to this congressman. He's like, I kind of like it. He writes back home to his party. And he's like, I think I'm pretty good here in D.C. I like to run again. They're like, no, we got somebody else. And so he goes home, and he waits a little bit, and they finally let him run again, and he runs and he loses. And then he runs again, and he loses again. And then he runs a third time, and he wins. And we know that guy, that young congressman, as the great emancipation, Abraham Lincoln. And the reason that story is so important to me is because I have no idea what's going to happen. All I know is that duty is mine, and then I'll leave the results to God. I don't think Adams had any idea that Abraham Lincoln was following him around, learning all this stuff, was going to ultimately be elected. When Adams dies, there's no abolition. He's, quote unquote, failed in his mission on earth, but he did do his duty. And I think God rewards that, maybe not in our lifetimes, but in other lifetimes. And so I think that's what we owe it to our country, to our children, and to everybody who comes after us. And so I hope that's what you guys are doing with your lives. I believe it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here listening to me blow you at 8:30 on a meeting. So thank you guys for being here tonight.